depending on where you get your statistics from for ACL injuries, 80% of them are non-contact, or 70%, depends, again, where you get your information. But in an interesting study, I think in 2014 on soccer players, of those non-contact injuries, a player was 1 to 2 meters around that person. So it wasn't like this athlete was just running with a soccer ball, stepped in a hole and fell, tore their knee or something. There was a perceptual aspect to the injury, which I find very interesting. And going further into that study, it found that defensive players were more likely to tear their injury or tore their ACLs than offensive players. So something about defending and the chaotic nature of that. So building perception into our rehab programs and our prevention program is huge.
That was Jeff Moyer, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. It's good to have you guys here. Jeff Moyer is the owner of Dynamic Correspondence Sports Training in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and has been, I believe, the most appeared guest on this show. Jeff has had 2 solo episodes, or he's been on 2 solo episodes, and he's been on 3 roundtables. So this is, I believe, his 6th appearance, and it's for a good reason. Jeff has a wide-ranging expertise. He gets incredible results, and he is one of the most driven individuals I know by learning and being on the cutting edge of the industry. And yet he's also highly practical and results-driven in his coaching and training. What we're going to be getting into today is kind of the continuum between injury prevention, a performance training program, and reconditioning. And this idea that none of those elements really live in isolation and they all mirror each other. And Jeff is going to get into the nuts and bolts of some elements of his injury prevention ideals within his performance training program, as well as talking a little bit about his reconditioning process. Jeff has gotten great performance results from his athletes, sprints and jumps and athletic performance measures and skill acquisition. And he's also gotten really good results in the reconditioning side. Things like getting female ACL surgery or ACL injured athletes back to playing 5.5 months post-surgery. Jeff leaves no stone unturned in his process in finding the best way to serve the athletes that are in his care. And so for the show today, we're going to get into the first half is going to be a little bit more on the prevention side of his program within the context of his total training philosophy. He's going to talk about how using a perceptual or perception action type element is important in injury prevention. It's not just forces and stepping on divots in the ground, and how the perception feeds into that. He's also going to talk about change of direction KPIs and indicators, and how technique also plays a hand in not only performance but injury prevention. The second half of the show, Jeff is going to get into a little bit of philosophy and reconditioning, so talking about some things he uses in the weightlifting realm, in the 1x20 realm, in some tempos on lifts and those elements. He's going to talk about plyometrics and really the nuts and bolts of his rapid reconditioning program and some of the things that he has found effective in getting athletes back to the field to play more quickly, and how he works alongside physical therapists working on their end to help athletes just get back really fast. Finally, he's going to talk about the total motion release system and using contralateral training to improve, to get people out of pain without even putting a hand on them. And so really cool stuff from front to back. Again, Jeff is a guy who is a man of many talents, and I always learn something when I sit down and chat with him, and this episode was no exception. That being said, let's get on to it. Episode 199, Jeff Moyer. Here we go. Jeff, welcome back to the show. Good to have you here, buddy.
Joel, thanks for having me back, man. It's an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, man. I think a lot of us have a lot different schedules these days. So it's definitely nice to not have to do these at quite as odd hours as I did, say, a month ago or 2 months ago. But I know this time, and we've been talking about this, so we've talked about this in the aftermath of our last recordings, but ACL injury prevention. What do you think about it? What's your take on this vast area that a lot of athletes are being ushered into in ACL prevention programs?
Well, I have an interesting, I think a little different background than maybe most coaches. I used to work at a sports medicine orthopedic practice. And one of my jobs was the return to play. I was the return to play guy after someone got hurt, saw the ortho, saw the PT, saw the ACT, and then me. And then in the meantime, I also ran their ACL prevention program, which I believe, if I remember correctly, was a 6-week program where we saw the athletes, I think, twice a week. And we start with this baseline jump test and how they land, and you take a video and then you put it in this program that they set up, and it gives you these numbers and these drawings of their valgus knee collapse and shows you how shitty they are. And then after 6 weeks, you redo the exact same test and punch it into the program, and it shows you how great their valgus is. And congratulations, you get a certification, you prevented ACL injuries, and la-di-da. And that was literally the whole program. And every workout was just a hodgepodge of just weird stuff, doing various jumps in the middle of the field on a lot of unstable surfaces, a lot of closed agility drills to cones and all this stuff. And it was, I don't know, I was turned off to it then. And the doctor, I think, could see that because I wasn't doing a very good job of promoting, trying to sell it to coaches and stuff. And I'm just the type of person, if it's not in me, I just can't fake it. So yeah, that didn't work out, me working there very long, and hence me down here in Pennsylvania. So it's an interesting, it's been an interesting journey starting there. And then my work with Dr. Yessis and seeing things from a biomechanical standpoint, with stuff, and then getting more into the vision and perceptual side of things with Dr. Harrison, has really kind of, again, changed my view, so to speak. And I guess there's three, I kind of categorize it as there's three camps that I see that view injuries and ACLs. There's your movements, people, your perception and action. There's no true biomechanics structure. Everything's based off of perception, to the environment, to the organism, or from the organism, and the task of what's going on. There are the other type of movement people that look at range of motion and use movement screens and this and that, and do everything in closed environments. And then you kind of got your strength camp that is, hey, let's work on the eccentric and the isometrics, and that will take care of their ability to decelerate and land. And for me, it's kind of, I try to use all of it. The answer is always in the middle. So I try to look at it all, when it comes to preventing injuries. I don't really start any which way. I just kind of use all of it. But what's interesting to me that not a lot of people talk about. So depending on where you get your statistics from for ACL injuries, 80% of them are non-contact, or 70%, depends, again, where you get your information. But in an interesting study, I think in 2014 on soccer players, of those non-contact injuries, a player was 1 to 2 meters around that person. So it wasn't like this athlete was just running with a soccer ball, stepped in a hole and fell, tore their knee or something. There was a perceptual aspect to the injury, which I find very interesting. And going further into that study, it found that defensive players were more likely to tear their injury or tore their ACLs than offensive players. So something about defending and the chaotic nature of that. So building perception into our rehab programs and our prevention program is huge. Now, I also kind of think it's crap to say that we have a prevention program and a rehab program, whatever. I think it's just all one and the same. I look at athletes, whether they're hurt or not, I put them in the same boat. I think a prevention program is just some kind of sales pitch that doctors use to create these programs to make money, or that some organizations use to say, hey, we have doctors' approval from this, so that gives them some kind of credibility to sell this bullshit. It's just one and the same. So my philosophy with working, whether it's prevention or it's with someone who's torn their ACL and we're trying to rehab them back, I really don't. It's really not much different. It should be one thing and one thing only, which is performance and getting them better. And if they're hurt, then we got to get them to be able to perform. And if they are performing, then we got to make sure that they stay able to perform. And that's really it. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, right on. And so let's kind of dig into it. You mentioned like different areas that you hit the problem from. And I totally agree with you also in the sense of how easy is it to have one metric saying, knee valgus or knees. I mean, and there's a difference as well, as we've talked about on this podcast, between knees coming in, the athletic version, knees in for the win, and true valgus, knees in to lose. And I mean, of course, what parent's going to know the difference, right? If you just tell a parent, hey, your kid's got this going on, oh, that's wrong. It just makes it an easy sale. And I think that I've heard things about people who will do movement screens on incoming athletes too, and tell the parents, oh, your child had, and it's like, here, come for this free movement screen or whatever, and then, oh, your child has XYZ wrong with them, so train with us. And just ways to tell people that there's something wrong with your athlete is, I don't know, it probably works well in marketing, but ethically, I'm not really sure how good of an idea that, especially too, just saying something's wrong. But anyways, it got me thinking too, the idea too of, and I was reading about this in Dr. Mark Bubbs's book Peak, but the systems thinking, where a linear thinking or a linear thought process would be it's just like a math equation, just one factor for the most part, and there's one metric, and in that case, the very calculated data approach could be very effective. But as soon as you have multiple systems, and our body's a system of systems, you have a lot of things going on, then that more calculated mathematical approach doesn't work as well anymore, and you need a different kind of thinking. And I think that's where a coach who can see it all comes in really well. And so I like how you see that from a multifaceted approach. So let's dig into those. Perhaps let's start with particularly let's start with the perception piece, because I found that really fascinating that you said it's defensive more than offensive, which would tell me that it's someone who is reacting to, and again, there's going to be an infinite amount of different reactions that you can make for the most part, but there's probably different enneagrams and different like similarities and things like that. But you would imagine that based off what you said, at 2 meters, it's 2 meters, you're defensive, you're reacting to something that perhaps you weren't prepared for from a perceptual space standpoint, and then you find your body in a bad position that it's not ready to handle. Talk about what you're doing in developing athletes from that standpoint.
Yeah, so we do a visual assessment, sports vision assessment, using different tools and metrics. With that, had a synaptic sensory station that looks at eight visual abilities: acuity, dynamic acuity, contrast sensitivity, peripheral awareness, multiple object tracking, contrast sensitivity, this and that. But then also, and that's general, that's on a computer screen. We also do kind of a peripheral vision field view. So I have this gomiometer looking thing that an athlete holds on their forehead like a dunce cap. And then there's this little thing that I move all the way to the right and all the way to the left. And the athlete just tells me when they can't see it in their peripheral view anymore. And on the top of the device, it just tells me the range of motion. And so I'm able to quantify athletes' peripheral view from their right to the left. And if there's a difference, then that's something we try to address. I really don't care too much about what the total number is. I try to look for differences. And then we look at binocularity, which is the ability for the brain to take information out of both eyes. Just because I can see you here on my Skype doesn't necessarily that the brain's taking information out of both eyes. And binocularity is the precursor to stereoscopic vision, or depth perception, which is the ability to see things in 3 dimensions. Depth perception is the ability to judge speeds and distance of things, but there's also space perception and height perception. So knowing how far away someone is or something, or how high it is. So sport like basketball, baseball, softball, tennis, those are important abilities. So we'll look at those. And then another thing that it's not so much a test, it's just kind of drills we do, but I can kind of judge right away how shitty someone's going to be is information processing, visual information processing. So for instance, when we think, our brain and our eyes are going to do one of 2 things, right? If I give you right now, you're staring at the screen, Joel, if I said spell California backwards, right? One of 2 things are going to happen. One, your eyes are going to start looking all over the place because you're thinking about what I just asked you to do. Or 2, you kind of block out what you're looking at right now and you try to picture the words in your head. And that's one of the issues with conscious thinking and playing sports. So we'll work on drills. We're trying to control those and separate those, the ability to think and see at the same time. Because sometimes, again, that's a theory that Dr. Harrison and I would talk about is, you're on defense and now you're trying to think about what the player is going to do. And again, something like that can go awry and your visual field's thrown off or you miss what's going to happen and your body has to try to make up for it and you get yourself in shitty positions. So those are all things that we do. And that's also part of our rehab process as well.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff, man. I'll have to take a trip out to your place sometime because I feel like this is something with the visual, this type of training. I think the Brock string is a very simple and straightforward thing. A lot of coaches have some familiarity with at least, but it'd be cool to see all the tools and techniques. It definitely makes sense. Like that's like almost more, it's software, right? But if you look at the whole picture of perception reaction, it's almost like more the hardware side of it. I feel like if you were to say that, like, what's your capacity to see? And then let's put it into maybe some field-based work. Do you do any field-based work, like in any space? I think I've seen you have a little space outside your gym. Like you get outside and do any type of situations, general situations to try to improve decision-making or just general perceptual abilities?
Absolutely. Yeah. So kind of start, depending on where the athlete is in their training or rehab process. So I'll kind of touch upon both. So last year I rehabbed a soccer player. She was cleared to play in 5.5 months after surgery by her doctors, and she was back playing. It wasn't like a slow process. She jumped back in. Her and her family wanted to get right back into it. She had some major soccer tournaments she wanted to get ready for. So her process was more general to specific. So we would do some eye charts, and we have cones, and I have balls, and we'll do things where I'm kicking soccer balls, or she's got to move to a cone that matches what it is she's looking at on these charts. So it's very general, but nonetheless, it's still information processing. Then we would do some drills where her sister would come in, or there'd be other athletes in here, and they're chasing each other, or they're trying to be the first one to this ball or this first one to this space or something where they're competing. And then we try to incorporate more and more athletes. I have a very small facility in Pittsburgh. Weather's just gray and gloomy all the time. So the majority of the time we were inside, but then when we can get outside, I have a little grass area outside where we're chasing people, getting away from people, trying to do some one-on-one drills, 2-on-2 drills, things like that. And then right across the field right across the road is a soccer field. And I trained her soccer team this year. So 1 to 2 times a week, I go to the field and we do all types of perceptual and action type of drills, more of a constraints-led approach. But for her, it was more general to specific. And now with some healthy athletes that we're trying to work on preventively, still, again, as I mentioned, I view things very similar. Just the progress might be a lot more, might be faster to more of that open side of things versus using just the boards and stuff like that. But we're always doing something. I kind of split my gym here where one half is weights and then the other half is just kind of open space. And so that's kind of how I do my workouts. 50% of it's the weights and 50% is the perceptual side.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's I think as I talk, this being myself and talking to other coaches, that almost represents, I think, the direction we're headed in some level is more field work, more perception work, more dynamic work, more work that's representative of sport, percentage-wise compared to just spending the whole time lifting a barbell. And I think it was Corey Schlesinger. I don't know if it was half and half or maybe a third, but like a third weights, a third like wrestling mat to grapple around, and a third field area. That'd be pretty rad too if you had a big enough space, right? If some spaces that wouldn't yield much of anything, but if you had a big enough space, that would be fantastic. It's that's definitely where my mind has gone, and a lot of my thought has gone as well. And so you got so we talked about the perception side, the vision. So vision, perception, that does lead me into the idea of the soft skills and hard skills in the sense of just change of direction ability. So if we're looking at all the facets of this, and I do want to reiterate too, I mean, we're not just talking about injury prevention. We're talking about being a good athlete in general. They're one and the same, right? It's not, this isn't just, the show could really be called a few different things. It could be called being a better athlete or preventing an ACL tear. But from just raw, and we've done this show about, I don't know what it is, 15 episodes ago or 20 episodes ago, where we were talking about perception reaction versus, if you want to call it a battle or whatever. But I think everything can live together. But what's your thought on just change of direction ability and ACL issues or knee prevention issues, and the way that an athlete generally changes direction and general strategies?
Well, I think it's pretty well documented that there are biomechanical aspects to tearing an ACL. So there are certain movement KPIs that I look for as far as, leading to possible injury. It's okay to do, a movement if I don't find it correct every now and then, and be able to be adaptable is not something I'm trying to inhibit. But there are KPIs that can lead to injury. So, for instance, I'm not a huge proponent of cutting off the inside leg, meaning the first step they take is that and a crossover step. I'm okay with a crossover step if it's the second step. So meaning I want the outside leg being the leg in which we plant and cut off of, and then the second leg. So where that is in relation to the body is something I look for, and then where the body is in relation to the legs, because there's studies done on trunk lean, too much excessive trunk leaning and posture and ACL tears as well. So those are kind of things we work on. So we do have a cutting technique that we work on, but it's very quickly built into a perceptual aspect of it. So I want the technique to be adaptable. Rather than just this closed drill where they're just doing it from cone to cone, or they're just doing it whatever. There's always a perceptual aspect to it. So once they got the general idea to it, to what we're looking for, we work on, one, the technical component of it based off a perceptual aspect, and then two, we'll work on the physical abilities as it relates to the cutting technique. So we do both general and specialized exercises to bring that out further, and then bring it more to a more and more to an open and skill where we're doing it based off of chasing someone, getting away from someone, trying to get to a space, close a space, whatever it is. I guess in a nutshell, quickly how I try to build that.
Cool, man. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think if I think of it almost like a block start in track and field, but laterally, right? Like I know that it's incorrect, just from a performance perspective, just to push all off the front leg in the blocks or the front leg in a 3-point stance. Both legs are pushing. I feel like there might be some similarity there between if the inside leg or that front leg is doing everything, then there's more things that could go wrong. You're closing down the degrees of freedom, if you, I guess, in that perceptual talk, right? When you're using that outside leg more so, you have a little bit more degrees of freedom. There's less that could potentially go wrong, I guess, or less that can get concentrated to go wrong. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to take a quick break from the show to share with you a little bit about what our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, now has available in their store. You hear me mention in the outro of the show all the time about the free lap timing system in the K-Box, which I have and use regularly. But today I wanted to share a little bit more about the bar speed monitoring units that Simply Faster has, which is the GymAware and the new portable Flex unit. So let me start with the GymAware. I mention it regularly on the show. It's been referred to as the Cadillac of bar speed monitors. Carl Valley calls it a lab inside a lunchbox, as the readings you get out of the GymAware go well beyond typical concentric or just up phase of the lift velocities. Rather, you can measure the entire shape of the barbell lift in terms of eccentric velocity, range of motion, and total work done. Total work being awesome, by the way, especially like comparing a long-armed bench presser or a 6'10 squatter versus a 5'11 point guard. So you're getting all these extra metrics that you're not getting on other units. It's perfect for teams wanting to manage the weight room, and the data synchronizes to software platforms such as CoachMe Plus, Team Builder, and Athlete Monitoring. So new to the store is the Flex, which is the ultra-portable and lower-price travel version of the coach's favorite GymAware. So just like the GymAware, the Flex measures the shape of each rep, range of motion, total work done, eccentric dynamics. So for this and the GymAware, this is the advantage that a force plate would have over just knowing how high you jumped. You're getting many other metrics and information that go into this unit of work. Compared to similar portable bar speed monitors, this unit gets the entire rep, rather than a fraction. So you have here 2 awesome tools. And if you're interested in upping your game in the velocity-based training and bar speed world, I would definitely recommend heading to the store at simplyfaster.com and checking into these 2 units. All right, let's get back to the show. I think, all right, so we talked about a little bit about, so we're talking about some of these different factors, strength, because I think that it is very easy to, again, live in one bucket. And I think that it's, like you said, there's a lot of talk of, oh, well, let's do this, I mean, eccentrically for eccentric strength to help prevent or whatnot. I mean, you're just sticking pretty still generally, just 1x20. Are you doing anything special in sort of tempos or anything like that on the strength end, or are you sticking general there and being specific on the other elements?
So yeah, our training program, even our rehab program are very similar. We start 1x20. That's just my starting point. I start that with everyone. Exercise selection is a missing conversation that I don't hear a lot when people talk about 1x20. They just get caught up with sets and reps, but it's exercise selection that matters. So for us, we're trying to cover our bases. So we do a lot for hip abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, knee flexion, extension, ankle sitting, standing calf raises, all types of, inversion, eversion, the Marinovich, wobble boards and stuff like that. And then as in that time, we're still working on the cutting technique. We're doing it in different directions, still always based off of a reaction. And then as the strength program progresses, the exercise selection now will start to become a little more specialized and start to resemble aspects of the cutting, running technique, throwing technique, whatever biodynamic structure we're trying to improve. So we'll do lunges, and how we do our lunges resemble the cutting technique that we're working on. The strength exercise will start to, we'll start adding in some eccentrics and isometrics, but it's only, components of what we do. It's not the whole facet. It's not a whole training program. And then the cutting technique will start to get into more multiple cuts, multiple changes of direction, multiple reactions. And then as the workout program progresses, we get into more specialized strength exercises. So our cutting, our lunges will become more explosive or plyometric or eccentric dynamic, or isometric dynamic, in how we perform them, which will marry very well into the jump exercises and our jump progressions, with a lot of lateral stuff that we do, which marries very well into our cutting technique, which by this time is now very open and reactive to multiple people and stimulus. And so that's how we kind of tie it all in together.
Tell me a little, you said you did do a little eccentric work. Tell me a little bit more about that. Are you using like K-box stuff for that? Are you using barbells or body weight?
Yes, well, it kind of depends. So with my rehab clients, like the girl soccer player that had, K-box was a large part of what we did. I'd like that as far as not completely beating up her joints. I actually find that the K-box is more joint friendly than traditional barbells. So yeah, she's getting that with the 1x20. That will be a component of a lot of my athletes' programs that are, have been with me for maybe 3-4 years, is more K-box work. We do delay squats. So this is like one of the last exercises we'll do. So feet are underneath the hips, and we're working eccentrically and isometrically in 4 various positions where we're lowering the load for 4 seconds, holding it for 4 seconds, lowering it for 4 seconds, holding it for 4 seconds, doing that 4 times. And then we try to overcome with a dynamic movement. So they jump. So I'll generally start with dumbbells and then progress them to barbells when I feel that they can jump with a barbell and not have them hurt their spine. For college and older athletes, we can do that with GHRs. That's a variant of a GHR that no one I've seen talk about and doing it, and even calf raises. And those are a bitch on standing calf raises, doing it in that fashion. So we can incorporate it in aspects of more specialized movements, even knee drives. But so it's incorporated, but it's not everything. For some, like let's say football players, offensive linemen or wrestlers, we'll build it more into the upper body exercise as well, doing delay push-ups or bench press or even rows and stuff like that. But yeah,
that's interesting. The whole delay I really like that in the sense. So basically, I'm in a squat and I'm dropping down. I'm stopping at like a quarter squat, stop at a half squat, stop at a 3/4, stop at a deep squat, and then come up. Like a few second pauses.
Well, it depends. So the range of motion is going to be dependent on the sport and what you're trying to improve. So generally, let's just say a soccer player, since that's the predominant sport that I work with, a quarter squat. So by the fourth squat, we're only in about a quarter squat. So maybe it's slightly lower, but it's about a quarter squat because that's generally the range of motion which their thigh will get to when they're sprinting or when they're changing direction. They won't get too much lower than that. So it's generally that. For my wrestlers or offensive linemen, yeah, I'll have them get maybe lower, maybe to a half squat, 90 degrees, and we'll change the position of their legs when they do it sometimes for those athletes. But for my runners and my jumpers, it's generally about a quarter squat. So they can work up to eventually pretty heavy loads relative to their body weight when they do these. But we're only doing them for 1 to 3 reps. There's no more than that. If they go more than 3 reps, they're just taxed. It's quite fatiguing.
Yeah, the time under tension probably adds up. Like each rep probably does take a little substantial amount of time.
16 seconds. That's a bitch.
It reminds me a little bit of I remember I bought those like jump soles with the proprioceptors back when I was 16 or 17, and I was watching the video that they put out with those. I wish it's probably buried at my parents' house. I hope it's buried at my parents' house somewhere, because if I ever find it and dust it off, Marv Marinovich was like the guy who teamed up with them, and one of the drills they were doing, of course this is all with the jump soles on, right? But you could do it without it just as easily or just as well. And it was on like a supercat or something, and they were doing kind of just that. It was like they were going through the squat range, but stopping almost every inch or 2 inches or something like that, like hitting a little isometric. A lot more. They probably did like 10 delays or 15, but there was a lot of them. And it does make me think about, I don't know, I just think that's a really interesting way that we tend not to think. And then also playing around a little bit with some of the stuff that in the weight room, the creativity in the weight room episode with Michael Zufel and Tyler Yerby, and the idea too, it kind of sticks in my head of allowing athletes to maybe pick maybe randomizing the delay a little bit too, or something where it becomes, it could just become something that, I don't know, like I'm sure that when you do it, the delay is a little different no matter what every time anyways, because of the repetition without repetition principle. Like people are just going to manual or on their own pick some different spots. But I just think there's a lot of creativity, a lot of dynamic stuff going on in that we typically don't see in a regular up and down barbell lift, or heck, even like an eccentric lift. There's a lot more of that explosive isometric co-contraction, control the joint action going on.
Yeah, I mean, I asked Doc, because the whole big craze now about isometrics, and I think before that was eccentrics and stuff like that. The big craze, like Dr. Yassis. Sorry, when I say Doc, he told me that the Russians, there's not anything that the Russians didn't look into. So if it was important, they would be doing it, or they would have done it. And not that they didn't think that eccentrics or isometrics are important, but not early on in a training career, in a training program, is it that important. You should just work on general strength and stuff like that. And so they kind of, and I hope I don't mess this up, but they kind of looked at it as kind of like how we're familiar with the percentage of general to specific exercises when an athlete starts, right? So maybe the first year in training, it should be 10% eccentric isometric, 90% general, just concentric lifting. And then as the athlete's yearly program progresses, or they progress year after year, it kind of more and more switches to that. And so, I don't know where I found that, or if it's in any of the Soviet sports reviews, but I do remember having that conversation with Dr. Yessis about it. So that's just kind of generally, the more I work with an athlete, the more eccentric isometrics I start putting into our program. Right
on. Cool, man. So covering those bases, I feel like that encapsulates a lot of your program. Was there anything we missed? So we talked perception, action, vision, strength. You got a little bit into the plyometrics. I'm sure we could that is probably an important part of it. Maybe Let's cover that for just a few minutes before we get to the next question.
Sure. So our jumping program marries very well. Our jumping progression marries very well with our running, which matches very well with our lifting program and our technical component. If there's a technical component we're trying to improve and work on, so everything's got to kind of be in sync. So that way, adaptive energy isn't necessarily thrown to just any one thing, and we're kind of getting something out of everything. So our jump progression starts, extensive to intensive to plyometric, from unweighted to weighted, short coupling to long coupling, if anyone's familiar with the Verkhoshansky model. And so, in the 1x20s, we're just doing very extensive jumping, trying to work on basic rhythm and elasticity. And then as we progress, we'll start incorporating more weights into some of the jumps. And then, when we get into the 8s, if they're working on strength, our jumps kind of match that. So we'll do more single effort jumps, which might be a single effort leg to leg jump. So if I'm standing on my right leg, I'm trying to jump as far to the left as I can, landing on my left leg, hold that for 3 to 5 seconds, and then repeat going from left leg to right leg. Right. So we're trying to work on the power output of the ability to jump from leg to leg, side to side. And then that might turn into a plyometric, where we're trying to go side to side as fast as we can. More for speed and distance. And so we'll do that before the competitive season. Generally, we try to do our plyos, maybe 6 weeks before a competitive season, just because it takes a little bit longer to get that full adaptation out of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, right on. You mentioned the girl that you had gotten back from an ACL, I think, in 5.5 months. And I know you've had really good success with the very speedy reconditioning and recovery with those athletes. Take us inside a little bit of I know obviously it's multifaceted, it's not just one thing, but what are some things that are working together to help bring athletes back faster?
Well, when I get an athlete like her, so I was fortunate. I've had several girls, unfortunately, who tore their ACL, but fortunate that they trusted me with their rehab. I don't do the full rehab per se, because I'm not a PT or a chiro. So they still go to PT, but what mainly then we have conversation with their PT. Their PT's trying to do is restore range of motion back. That's one of the first things we're trying to work on, is get range of motion back. But for me, we kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier in the conversation. There's depending on where you get your information, there's 13 biological systems. No system works alone. No system gets hurt alone, and no system heals alone. So I try to have this 10,000 step view or step back view of our injuries and our athletes. And the first thing I want to do is to seek to fix what is being protected. So anytime there's an injury, there's automatically going to be protection of the injured site. So talking about knees, the knee is going to be protected. The body is going to be protected of that. So scars, for instance, can be very disruptive to fascia and meridian lines, and can cause pain and restriction. So once an athlete's scar is healed, we'll do various things for the healing, which, we can use arnica, MSM, things like that around it to help heal it. Microcurrent can help with the scar tissue and the fascia to heal. I also do a fascial or a scar release technique once the scars have healed, to kind of release some of the fascia and tight tension around that. Lymphatic, everyone, you've had Corfus and Fichter and those guys on talking about RPR, Douglas Heel, I do Touch for Health. I do applied kinesiology. So neurolymphatic work is in there, because maybe the lymph system has kind of now become blocked to that area. And so if we're trying to help control inflammation, we want to make sure the lymphatic system is flowing well. And another aspect of controlling inflammation is we use a lot of food and nutritional supplements for that. So for instance, blackcurrant and chlorophyll are great anti-inflammatories. Again, it's not to say we don't want inflammation. We just want to be able to help control it so it doesn't get out of hand. It's more naturally, it's more natural as far as the healing process goes. And then grounding mats. I know you and I have had conversations off camera before about the use of grounding mats. I'm big into earthing and grounding. anyone unfamiliar with that, it's, in a nutshell, it's becoming in contact with the earth, getting in contact with the earth, stand barefoot or lay, skin to skin with the earth. Because, voltage always moves from an area of high voltage to low voltage, and the earth is a high voltage area. And when our body's kind of beaten up, it becomes low voltage. So that voltage will be transferred. Those electrons will be transferred into us, which can help with the inflammatory process. I don't remember what the name of the site is, but if you just look up grounding, earthing, there's a great site that's got, they got, I think, 22 peer-reviewed studies on inflammation and grounding and the positive effects grounding has on that. So that's awesome. So that is a cheap and easy tool to use. Hey, just go lay in the grass for a half hour, a couple times a day. If you don't have that, get some grounding mats, go sleep on a grounding mat. So that's something I use both personally for myself and for my family. And I have a grounding mat and grounding pads here. So I have a bag of patches that I loan to my athletes. Go check that your outlet is grounded, which there's a quick and easy little test they can do. And then you just put these patches in and around their knees or put them on the bottom of their feet and go to sleep. And that's it. And that can get you the same benefits as being in contact with the grass. And that's an easy way to ground for, 7 to 8 hours while you're just sleeping in your bed. And then we try to look at the reflex system. So that's an area of interest. I kind of go down this weird rabbit hole of, I like to thank Dr. Yessis, but also Dan Fichter, our mutual friend Dan Fichter, for this rabbit hole of studying weird sciences. So the reflexes of the body are very fascinating to me. And the withdrawal reflex, for instance, is one that, anytime you have an injury, let's just say to the lower extremity, you roll your ankle, you hurt your knee, the body's going to start limping to protect that. Well, that's a withdrawal reflex. So there's things we can do to help reset that reflex so it doesn't stay on, because our reflexes are meant to protect the body, and sometimes they can be left on after injuries. And so through the use of primal reflex release technique, there's things we can do, that I can do, to help offset that and turn off those reflexes, which, if our defense system's down, our nervous system's our autonomic system's gonna relax, become more parasympathetic tone and things like that. And through the use of autogenic reciprocal inhibition, techniques, we can help calm, particular muscles or any kind of anything around the knee to help get it to those muscles to stop being so guarded and relax. And then something more recently that I've kind of really gone down the rabbit hole that's been a game changer for me is Square One system, which Square One's the first, as far as I know, the first motor control restoration system that helps with the body to be able to withstand ground reaction forces. Anytime there's stress, an injury, anything like that, certain joints are going to become more protective. Compensations, the brain's ability to kind of rewire things. But sometimes we don't want compensations. And the brain's kind of protect a joint, let's say the knee. Well, other things are going to try to pick up the slack for that. So through the use of Square One systems, we can help ask the brain and the nervous system to kind of get, release and stop protecting that area so it can withstand ground reaction forces once again, and other things don't have to pick up slack for it. So then we don't develop other issues, because what's the biggest predictor for a future injury? Well, it's a previous injury. And so, those are just some of the things we'll go to, that I start with. And then the other aspect is, how do we nourish the structures that we need to heal? And I kind of touched upon that with nutrition. So there's a lot of things we'll do nutritionally, from overall diet to the whole food supplements to help restore and replenish what is lost and what is needed to get back to those structures, the ACL, to the ligament and tendons. And then, electric stim is a huge aspect of our rehab. So I have not a TheraStim, but it's something like that, like an ARP wave that has a DC potential. And I know you're a fan of the ARP wave and the role the DC potential has, or waveforms have, for healing and for rehabilitation. That's a whole other podcast that you should have, but that's a large part of what we do as well. And then on top of it, 1x20 in itself is a huge game changer as far as just rehab. I mean, it's a training program, but it's also a rehab program at the same time. because it helps strengthen ligaments and tendons faster, get more blood flow to the area, improves capillary density, which will help with more blood flow to that area and get more things moving. And so it kind of ties together, all of what we're trying to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of stuff. Just to unpack one thing of that really quickly. And with Square One, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know I'm looking to get Sean on the show here shortly. And probably right after the show, I'm actually going to email him and make sure I try to get a time set up. But with the primal reflex system, that's something I'd like to dig into for our last portion of this today, because I had learned a little bit of that from Dan Fichter myself, and I was really amazed. I just with the good side helping the bad side, and we all, I think we talk about the crossover ability of the body, but maybe I don't think we do it as much as we probably should or think about. So could you talk a little bit about that primal reflex, the good side, the bad side, and how that works and what you're doing with it?
Well, actually, you bring up something. One, primal reflex release is, again, a little different than what you're asking. What you're asking for is total motion release. Total motion release is using the good side to fix the bad side, which has the reason why it works is there's a crossover effect in the brain. So for instance, for any listeners here, anytime there's an asymmetry in the body, left ACL injury, left knee problem, right shoulder problem, whatever you have, if you work on the good side, 9 out of 10 times, it can at least decrease your pain by at least 50%. I would say more, but I don't want to make any claims. And then people DM me saying, hey, it was less than 50% or anything like that. But so for instance, if you were to do an arm raise, just keep your right arm straight, bring it all the way up to your ear, and then compare it to the left side. Is one side better than the other? Or a lot of times with ACL, we'll do a hip flexion. So I'll have them stand still, or you can even do the sitting if they can't be weight bearing, and just raise your right leg up and then raise your left leg up. And is one leg better than the other? Well, if let's just say the left leg is the leg you tore your ACL and you can't raise it up as well as your right, then do 2 sets of 20 on the right leg. And it could be 2 sets of 10. It could be 3 sets of 10. It could be whatever. I usually start with a little more volume, just to have that, but you don't want it to the point where it's super fatiguing and it's, the person's leg is just on fire because they're doing 40 reps of a leg raise. But then usually once they've done 2 sets of 20 and you go back and test the left leg, it will raise higher. And then, rule number 1 in physical therapy is if it works, you do it again. So after they've done it, and if it has any kind of improvement, we just do it again. And we just keep doing it until it doesn't get any improvement. So for instance, I had a girl softball player who had left shoulder problems. She came to me after going to 9 weeks of physical therapy. And after 9 weeks of physical therapy, I said, well, scale 1 to 10, 10's someone stabbing you with a knife. Where's your pain? And she says it's an 8. I said, you went to 9 weeks of the physical therapy and you're still an 8 out of 10. That's some bullshit. So I'm not even lying. I wish I videoed this and I can, so that way people don't think I'm making this shit up. I just had her do a whole bunch of exercises on her right arm, a whole bunch of movements on her right arm, and her shoulder pain went down to a 0. And that was it. I didn't even touch her. I literally just the other day was ordering food at this Italian restaurant. And while I was waiting, because they're being super slow, I overheard one of the waiters or one of the people behind the bar talking to the cook about how he likes to lift, but his shoulder's killing him. And I said, well, hey, what motions bother your shoulder? He said, well, it's anything with this. Do you ever have problems with your infraspinatus? I said, yeah. I said, here, what motions hurt? He said, this. I said, well, try doing it on your good arm, your left arm 20 times. He looked at me weird, but he said, okay. So he did it. And then he's like, well, now my shoulder doesn't have that popping anymore and the pain's gone. What the hell did you just do? And I just took my food and walked out.
I love it. I think as I go through all this too, I think that as we go through the journey of the different modalities and the different courses and the different hands-on techniques, something I've learned is I tend to try to find ways for athletes to relieve their own pain by them moving first. And I know, like Dr. Tommy John talks all about you heal you, and the idea of before we do anything else, if you can move as the athlete and do it yourself and do something to give pain relief to yourself, that's super empowering. And so
absolutely.
And even I think there was a show that Tommy did where it's like, if you can't, just move in any way you can that doesn't elicit pain, and the next day it's gonna be better. But in this scenario, we're talking about instant, like something that's on one side and that will instantly transmit to the other side. And there's so much power in that. It's really empowering, and I think it's a really fantastic. It's easy too. I mean, I'm sure that you can go layers deep into it, but on a very simple note. It's just you're just trying to get the movement that you can't do on the injured side, right, with the good side, and doing it 20 times or a few sets. And
yeah, it's so easy, and it's almost people. When I know Dan had this experience, and I'm having this experience now. When I talk to people about it, or when I do it with people, they look at me like I'm crazy, and it just doesn't necessarily register. Like when Dan first showed me that this maybe 3-4 years ago, I was like, all right, that's kind of cool. And then I just kind of moved on, and it really didn't hit me until, I don't know, maybe a year ago, especially with a lot of my adult clients, like how powerful it is and how easy it is and how fast it works. So I went all aboard and, got all certified and everything like that. And, I'm balls deep into it, but it's so easy. And you're right. Actually, it's so easy to teach where these people, my clients, can do it themselves. You can do it part of their warm up. A lot of my athletes will do these part of their warm up. I have had golfers put on 30 yards on their drive from just doing these in the warm ups. Baseball players will do this, or softball players will do this as part of their warm ups. Just check their ranges of motion. If there's a difference, and just work the good side. For anyone who has pain, this is part of their warm up. They do it first thing in the morning. And it can literally be just about almost any motion you want it to be. That's the cool thing. And even still, let's just say that girl's shoulder pain didn't go down completely to a 0. Let's just say it was still a 2 or a 3, which is better. But the perfectionist in me want a 0. Sometimes if you go down and you look at the hips, and I'm sure you know this, Joel, go down and look at the hips and you check, hey, range of motion of flexion or internal rotation, external rotation, and you have them work the good side of their hips, you'll find that that will fix their shoulder pain. It's cool. So that's why with total motion release, we kind of do a top-down movement approach, and then you start with what's the shittiest one. What is the worst movement? You start there and you see what kind of global effects has on all the other movements, and then you go to the second one. And her shoulder range of motion was the first thing, so we worked on that. That got it down to like a 2 or 3, and then we looked at the next worst thing. It was her hips. We improved her hips, and then the shoulder pain went down to a 0.
That's awesome, man. It makes me think too of there's that art to it as well. Find that joint that's the linchpin for everything else. It's kind of like a masterful acupuncturist who knows that one spot that's going to unlock everything else to a degree. So I think there's a lot of power there. It's cool to talk about things that anyone can do right now. Obviously, you can go down the rabbit hole and become more specialized, but the principle is so simple and something that's effective. So I think that's really cool. And thanks for your time sharing that insight into all these facets of this thing we call, I don't know, you really call it, it's injury. It's being a better athlete, it's being a better human being, mover. This is a good
training program is going to be a good rehab program, which is going to be a good prevention program. It should be all one and the same. Anyone that tries to sell you a different is selling you snake oil. I think it's just bullshit.
Yeah, it was good talking about it today. Thank you so much for your insight, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joel. I appreciate it.
All right, that wraps up another show. Thanks for being here. If you enjoy this show and this podcast, you can really help us out by leaving us a rating or review on iTunes or Stitcher, whatever you're listening to, just to help spread the word of what we're doing and help this show reach the ears of those people who would be helped by it. Much thanks to our sponsor, SimplyFaster.com, suppliers of high-end training technology. They've been a longtime sponsor of this show, and they have an awesome store and blog and a great company for any piece of sports technology, timing systems, as well as training equipment. So be sure to check them out. We'll see you guys next week with another great guest. Have a good one.